Starting today, you're on duty for all 7 of us. I was greeted by these words as I opened the front door, coming face to face with my son, Cedric, whom I hadn't seen in months. Behind him stood his wife, Sissy, and their children, all laden with large bags. I didn't hear anything about this. It's unreasonable to just show up at someone's home with so many people, even if it is your family home. I tried to explain, but Cedric didn't seem to care much. Yeah. He replied dismissively, barging in, a sight that filled me with dread. Why had he returned? Months ago, after I criticized him and his wife for their extravagant spending, it was him who called me a greedy old lady and cut off all contact. Cedric, physically much stronger, easily pushed the door open and entered the foyer. There's no way we have room for 7 people, right? So, he said as he stretched out his arms and firmly grasped my shoulders. The pain made me groan, and he said with a nasty smile, "After you're done with cleaning and laundry, Mom, you can sleep in the hallway." My name is Sharon. I'm a 75-year-old woman living on a pension, just an ordinary person. Before I was married, I worked hard at a company. I enjoyed my job in the beginning, and because there were many women around, there was understanding for women working overtime. Back then, the societal expectation was that women would stay home once they got married. But, "You're working very hard, and we'd like you to stay if possible. What do you say?" the company said to me. Although it was a fulfilling job, my husband wanted me to be a housewife, so I took on that role after getting married. I also took pride in cooking, always adding a special touch to my dishes to make them taste professional. I aspired to dedicate time to those extra touches. Becoming a housewife also meant I had more time for my hobby, sewing, which secretly pleased me. I only had one child, Cedric, but I think back fondly on the times when it was just the 3 of us. I was happy when he was clingy during his early childhood and elementary school years. As he entered middle school, he went through a rebellious phase and started keeping his distance, but it seemed he had good friends. A friend he made in middle school is still in touch, I hear. In high school, influenced by his friends or perhaps the thought of college, he began to focus more on his studies. While my husband held traditional views, he was supportive of parenting, making the challenging task of raising a child enjoyable. I was fortunate to have mom friends around, especially during high school and college entrance exams, when we would discuss, "How are you dealing with your child? What advice should I give? What's the best way to support them to focus on their studies?" Such was the circle of support I had. When Cedric got married, he hadn't saved up for the wedding, so I ended up covering most of the expenses. My husband worked hard and always brought money home, so we lived a comfortable life without financial struggles. My hard-working husband passed away from illness 5 years ago. And now I live alone. My income comes from my pension and the savings my husband left behind. I utilize my sewing hobby to create items and sell the finished products on flea market websites, earning a modest income. I'm not struggling financially and have a fulfilling life, engaging in hobbies and volunteering with friends. Besides volunteering, I enjoy spending fun days out, like going to lunch with friends around me. My son, Cedric, is now 44 years old. He got married 17 years ago and has his own family. His wife, Sissy, is 40. I remember her being quite shy when they were students, a long time ago. That image of her has been completely overturned over the years. Cedric and Sissy have 3 children, who are now 14, 10, and 8 years old, my grandchildren. When the grandchildren were younger, Cedric and Sissy had a good relationship without any particular problems. I made sure not to do to my DIL the kind of things I disliked being done to me as a MIL, avoiding sudden visits and giving money during celebrations so they could buy whatever they wanted. I thought we maintained a good distance while still being close, but the situation has drastically changed recently. Sissy started asking for gifts for the grandchildren or for expensive dining out almost every week. Whenever we go out to eat, "Let's go eat," she would say, yet neither of them would even pretend to reach for their wallets. Moreover, they always choose expensive restaurants. But dining out was still the lesser evil. I was happy to see the grandchildren enjoying their meals, smiling and saying how delicious it was whenever they came along. Gradually, she began asking for expensive jewelry. I've known her since Cedric's high school days, so I've known her for a long time. Sissy was very quiet as a student, inconspicuous for better or worse. That she would become so brazen was beyond me. I sigh, thinking I lacked judgment. She wasn't inherently rude, she just became overbearing the moment she decided she could say anything to me. As relatives interacted with her, they gradually realized her true nature and began distancing themselves. Now, the only ones still dealing with her have very strong personalities. Sissy, thinking she could control me, began demanding rings, necklaces, brand name wallets, and bags. I once confronted her. "Why do you need such expensive things? Aren't these for your use alone?" She claimed it was all for the children. "I need this outfit for a school event. Only a brand name bag will match this dress," she would say. But I couldn't afford brand name items just for that reason. Ignoring her requests seemed to work, as she eventually stopped asking for more. However, she then started targeting things that were harder to refuse. When I was cooking dinner, "Make some for us too," she'd come over and say. If I refused, "Then, just something you have is fine." She'd help herself to my fridge, taking leftovers or the meat I had just bought. Even if I protested strongly, she'd laugh it off. "Thank you," shake off my arm, and take what she wanted. I was appalled that she would go to such lengths. It's common to hear about MIL being mean to their DIL, but is it normal for me, the mother, to be at my wit's end? Demanding meals for her whole family during an unannounced visit is incredibly presumptuous. Yet, she never attends family gatherings. At Christmas, she demands gifts for the grandchildren and leaves without greeting other relatives after devouring the feast. My warnings were always ignored. Fed up with her terrible behavior, I confronted her strongly. Then Cedric sighed blatantly, clicked his tongue, and said, "Coming to see an old lady living alone, giving you time with your grandchildren, and this is how you speak to me? Fine then. We won't contact this unreasonable old woman again." "Who's being unreasonable here?" "Fine, I won't contact you either. Don't ever come back." Sissy left quickly without looking at me, taking the children with her. Since then, the frequent calls stopped, and so did the unexpected visits. Afterwards, I became even busier with my sewing hobby and volunteering, leading a life without Cedric. Surrounded by supportive friends, I continued to enjoy busy yet fun days, including regular lunches out. Having cut off contact with him, I was enjoying peaceful and calm days. Between my sewing hobby, volunteering, and lunches with friends, I was living happily with just the right amount of stimulation. During my volunteer work, "Sharon, thank you as always." I felt truly appreciated when people with disabilities would say. Being naturally sociable with many friends, I was blessed in that regard. I was used to my mobile phone ringing with messages from friends. About 3 years after my estrangement from Cedric, the house phone, which hadn't rung in a while, went off. It was Cedric. I had immediately blocked him on my mobile, but didn't know how to block calls on the landline. Wondering what could it be about after such peaceful years, I picked up the receiver. "Hello? Mom?" Cedric's voice could be heard. Then, from the other end of the phone, "Hey, did you get through to Sharon?" Sissy's voice was heard softly. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "I need money." He laughed, unabashed. As I was about to hang up, disheartened, Cedric sighed. "Actually, I got fired." Eh? Reacting might have been a mistake. Thinking I was receptive, he rushed to explain. "I was a bit ill and made some mistakes, leading to a major blunder. They told me to take responsibility. So, I was let go without even a farewell party." "That's tough. Keep your chin up," I said, though internally, I thought, so what? Predicting his next words was easy. As I tried to end the call, his desperate voice kept me on the line. It seemed he didn't expect an easy loan. "If not money, how about living together again?" "What?" "Mom, you can live happily with your adorable grandchildren, and we save on rent. We're family, we should support each other. I'll call back, so please clean the house for us." "Don't joke with me. Living with you would never make me happy. You're the one who wanted to cut ties, and now you come crawling back when you're in trouble? You should rely on Sissy, not me." Unable to stay silent at his selfishness, I raised my voice for the first time in a while. From afar, Sissy chimed in. "I'm already working full-time. But with 3 kids, we can't make ends meet, so we need Sharon's help. You do have some love for Cedric and the grandchildren, right?" "Love? No way. Living with you, I'd just be a housekeeper and you'd bleed me dry. I refuse to live together or give you any money. Don't ever contact me again." I slammed down the receiver, only for the phone to ring again instantly. Disgusted by the incessant ringing, I left the receiver off the hook. Anyone with something important to say could call my mobile. However, the attempts from Cedric and his wife to contact me didn't stop. Putting the receiver back after having it off the hook for so long only led to their calls coming through at random moments. Growing tired of ignoring them, I reached out to a businessman friend who's good with tech, asking over my mobile phone. "Hello. Can you teach me how to block calls on my landline?" 3 months of peace later, having nearly finished sorting out my house and while making a drawstring bag with my sewing, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. It was unusual for the doorbell to ring without any prior arrangement, so I checked the entrance camera. Cedric and his wife's faces were prominently displayed. A bad feeling was all that came to mind. If I let Cedric and his family in, it would surely lead to trouble. Intending to send them away, I said, "I'm busy right now. Can you leave?" But Cedric responded, "Don't be like that. We've come all this way. We have something important to discuss. Just hear us out." Revealing behind him, not just his family but also Sissy's parents. Cedric and his wife, their 3 children, and the in-laws, 7 people in total had come, each carrying large suitcases. Sending away in-laws felt too harsh, even for me. Turning away guests with big luggage could cause a scene at the doorstep, attracting unwanted attention from the neighbors. Reluctantly, and against my better judgment, I let them into the living room. I ushered Cedric and his wife along with the in-laws into the living room, letting the 3 grandchildren play upstairs. I could hear the children's laughter echoing down. Without consulting me, "Mom, let's live together. We've even brought our luggage, see?" Cedric said. I instinctively replied, "Living together is out of the question. Please take your things and go back." But he wouldn't back down so easily. He argued, "Mom, we're trying to be filial by living together. We thought we'd give you something to live for by taking care of the grandchildren in your old age. That's being filial, right? He said in a condescending manner. With a sigh of exasperation. Look, as you know, I'm 75 years old. It's impossible for me to take care of the grandchildren at this age. I said, disillusioned that our previous phone conversation seemed forgotten. The thought of depending on a self-centered Cedric was absolutely out of the question. Sissy added, Sharon, Cedric is right. Living together would make things easier for you, right? Seeing the grandchildren every day would make you happy, wouldn't it? I dreaded the thought of how much money and effort would be drained from me if I ended up living with Cedric's family. The thought alone was chilling. Sissy added, Sharon, you're already old and don't have much time left, so think carefully. If you live with us, you can dote on your cute grandchildren every day. She said. I had barely spoken to the in-laws since the wedding greetings, hardly even seeing their faces. The in-laws are child-centric, probably spoiled their only daughter, Sissy, quite a bit. Such Sissy, too, must have been raised indulged in her parents' distorted affection. Then Mariah, my MIL, added fuel to the fire. Look, Sharon. We both don't have much time left, so let's cooperate with our daughters. She said. It was indeed the in-laws. Their character must have significantly influenced her audacity. Though I don't know about their life, they seem to believe Sissy's word is law. With numbers on their side, they've become bolder. Cedric, getting carried away, said, Isn't it filial of me to give our mom, whose life is nearing its end, a lively family and a purpose through caregiving? Laughing loudly. I suspected Cedric was trying to make me feel indebted for things he's now pretending never happened. I was infuriated that he was dismissing all I had done for the grandchildren, using my money as if it were water because Sissy wanted it, because Cedric needed it. And Mariah echoed Sissy's words as if they were absolute. Sharon, our Sissy is a smart girl. Let's do as Sissy says. Smiling too brightly. That overly bright smile made me feel uneasy. That's why I had avoided the in-laws. And now, after not seeing them since the wedding. The nerve of the in-laws to approach so boldly is beyond irritating, it's downright audacious. I can't help but think the in-laws are quite brazen. Mom, we're here to live with you, to make you happier. From today, we're moving into this house. He continued with a smirk. Then, disrespectfully, we'll take your room, so you can sleep in the hallway from tonight. He said this, dismissing me. Sissy, smirking in agreement. Sharon, we're counting on you. She added. I couldn't stand being manipulated by Cedric's family and the in-laws any longer. I pushed past them and went back to my room upstairs. After quickly packing, I came down with my carry-on bag, surprising Cedric, his wife, and the in-laws. I'm leaving, so do as you please. I said. What? Cedric was speechless. Asking. What about the housework? Sissy panicked as well, saying. Exactly. I thought I'd finally be freed from household chores and could even reduce my part-time work. Hearing this confirmed they intended to treat me like a housekeeper. Cedric, jobless, and Sissy, only working part-time, couldn't possibly support their family's expenses. Sissy's brazenness left me speechless. Along with her PIL who were tagging along as an unwelcome bonus. I couldn't possibly take care of them all. I told Cedric and his wife. This house has become too much for me to manage alone. That's why it's already sold. You can live here if you want, but you'll need to buy the house back. The couple seemed confused by what I was saying. I continued. I've been planning to move out for 3 months now. He retorted. But there are still things in this living room. I replied. Those things were meant to be disposed of last. Most items here weren't needed for the new house. I'm throwing away what's not needed. What I need has already been taken to the new place. Then, if you want to live here, you'll have to buy the house back. Though it's well kept and close to the station, it won't be cheap. I added. The living room's interior was the only thing left because I planned to have it cleared out by movers after everything else was gone. That's why it still had some furnishings. Cedric and his wife pleaded further. Mom, I'm your precious son, right? And the kids, they're your adorable grandchildren. I couldn't help but laugh. My dear Cedric disappeared 3 years ago when we estranged. Why come to me now? Just go back to your original home, I said. There's no obligation for me to take care of a grown 44-year-old Cedric now. Hearing this, we've already terminated our apartment lease. Without a job, I can't pay the rent. Living on Sissy's income is tough. We have no choice but to rely on you, Mom, Cedric said. Despite his plea, I felt no duty to support Cedric's family and the in-laws. I dismissed his words. What are you talking about? Find a job, and if Sissy continues her full-time part-time work, you'll manage. Don't use unemployment as an excuse, get a job. I firmly pushed him away. My parenting days are over. I'm not obligated to support Cedric anymore. Cedric responded angrily. I'm asking because I can't find a job immediately. Then ask the in-laws. They're good supporters for Sissy, and it'll be easier for you to live with them, I retorted. Sissy argued. We, as a couple, and our parents have already sold our homes to come here. We have nowhere else to go but here. I no longer own this house. If you want it, you'll have to speak to the real estate agent, I explained. Observing them, it was clear they genuinely had nowhere else to go. But this was no longer his home to return to. I'm appalled at both of them. Astounded they thought they could live with me without my consent. The audacity of not only Cedric and his wife, but also the in-laws thinking they could just move into my home was beyond belief. Mariah then proclaimed, If you're a parent, it's only natural you take care of Cedric, his wife, and your grandchildren. Her brazenness knew no bounds. So, I'm supposed to take care of the in-laws as well? If you're their parent, why don't you look after your daughter and her family? Besides, Cedric and I severed ties 3 years ago. As far as I'm concerned, Cedric is dead to me. It's too late to rely on me now. The house is sold, and my new place is a 1DK, not big enough for all of you, I said, filled with sarcasm and disdain. My generosity doesn't extend to supporting a family I've cut ties with. Without a home to offer, there's nothing I can do. As a pensioner, I have nothing left to give to him and his family. I'm already overwhelmed with my own care in old age. The house is filled with memories of my husband and the good times we had, especially when the economy was better, and how hard he worked to buy it. Not to mention, it holds precious memories of raising our only son, Cedric, when he was small. The nostalgia can bring tears to my eyes. Is it irresponsible to disown one's grown son? But he is over 40 now, married with 3 children. If there's still responsibility on me, perhaps I failed as a parent. Meanwhile, Cedric and his family were blaming each other, not expecting the house to be sold. Selling the house might seem risky for someone my age, especially after the mortgage is paid off. I wouldn't have done it if my relationship with Cedric hadn't soured. Sissy and the in-laws were furious with him, blaming him for lying. They were adamant that he was solely to blame. She angrily said, Sharon, you said you'd never sell the house full of memories. Didn't you check properly? This ruins everything. Unbeknownst to them, I had been good friends with the owner of the apartment Cedric's family had lived in. After Cedric suggested we live together 3 months ago, I reached out to her, my friend and the owner, out of concern. She informed me that Cedric had been discussing giving up the apartment for months prior. To be honest, I was stunned by Cedric's actions, but grateful I knew about their plans in advance. My friend, the owner, had told me Cedric had said, "I want to live with Mom. We want her to take care of the kids. While Mom is still healthy, we can be filial to her." Knowing this, I made plans to avoid living with him and his family. At 75, there's no way I could care for energetic children. And it was clear Cedric and his wife would dump all the housework on me. I also feared they would deplete my entire savings. I spent a week contemplating what an easily manageable environment for a 75-year-old would look like. Living alone in this house is impractical because it's too big to manage. Even now, I struggle to keep up with it. After much thought, I decided to sell this place and move into senior housing. The senior residence, not being as spacious as a house, required me to carefully select and move only necessary items. Disposing of what wouldn't fit was easy, given my wide social circle. I sold furniture, dresses, antiques, and the many books my late husband left behind. Items used in recent years were donated to a charity bazaar at a volunteer site. I collected necessary documents for the move at the city office, and had almost completed the moving process 4 days ago. Having settled the final utilities arrangements, I was enjoying sewing my last moments in the house when Cedric arrived. Hearing our exchange, my grandchildren peeked from upstairs, prompted by Cedric and his wife. "Leaving us and Dad behind, Grandma, you're heartless," the eldest, 14, accused. Then added, "A lonely old grandma should live with us. And you should leave all your money to my dad and Mom." The 10 and 7-year-olds echoed this sentiment, clearly influenced by Cedric and Sissy. Reflecting on where his upbringing went wrong, I realized his and Sissy's paths were of their own choosing. Considering the grandchildren's behavior, their future seems challenging. But that's beyond me and not my concern. I suggested to them, as if to teach the grandchildren, "You might as well ask the in-laws. There's no need for it to be me." Then, "The in-laws have no savings, and living on their pensions is tight. Having us as family will make your life more enjoyable," he responded. I could only sigh in disbelief at his request. "If you're an adult, Cedric, find a job while Sissy works part-time. If she is working, you can at least rent an apartment in her name. The owner of the apartment you lived in before is keeping it vacant for a while. If a loan is feasible with her part-time income and your unemployment, you might as well buy the house back," I suggested. After leaving, I contacted the real estate agent. At my age, I just want to live a life that suits me. Later, I learned that Cedric and his wife tried to reclaim the house I sold. He wanted to buy back the house of his memories and spoke to the real estate agent about it. He mentioned the address of his childhood home, expressing a desire to purchase it. However, a loan requires approval, and it seems they couldn't secure one with only Sissy's part-time income. Unemployed Cedric couldn't even initiate a loan discussion. The well-maintained, well-located house was too expensive to buy back on his budget, and they couldn't afford it. For unemployed Cedric and part-time worker Sissy, the house was too pricey. They ended up pleading with the owner of their former apartment, and the 7 of them, including the in-laws, moved in together. The owner was surprised that, besides Cedric's family, the in-laws were also living there. My friend mentioned, "While it secures the rental income, I just hope they don't cause any trouble. Neighborhood disputes are the most troublesome." Living in the cramped apartment with 7 people, including small children, seems to be stressful. I heard that living with the in-laws in such a tight space has been particularly straining, causing frustration. An acquaintance living near Cedric's apartment mentioned that Cedric and Sissy seem increasingly worn out. Cedric found a full-time job, but, without qualifications, his salary is low. With the money from selling the house, my husband's savings, and my pension, I'm living comfortably in a decent senior apartment. I enjoy my days filled with sewing, volunteering, dining with friends, and feeling content with my peaceful life. Since moving to the senior apartment, I've made more friends through gate ball, enjoying my time more than before. I've also met a nice man, adding excitement to my life. Though I'm not considering marriage. It feels good to be useful to someone. Spending time with good people makes me happy. I hope to continue enjoying healthy, happy times like these. My name is Luna. I was a 28-year-old who worked in a flower shop located in an office building, creating flower arrangements. My husband, Oliver, was 30, 2 years older than me, and worked as a hairstylist in the same building on the 2nd floor. He was not exactly a celebrity stylist, but he was quite popular. We were celebrating our 3rd year of marriage that year. Apart from the fact that we had been unable to have children, I thought we were doing well as a happy couple. But it seemed I was the only one who thought that way. How did we first meet? Oliver used to frequently buy flowers for his salon from the flower shop on the 1st floor. Initially wary of Oliver, who was skilled in conversation due to his job, I gradually found it natural to have him by my side. How long was it after we started dating? Oliver invited me to dinner at his parents' house, saying he wanted to introduce me to his family. There, Oliver's brother and his fiancée were also present. I had heard about Oliver's struggles being compared to his excellent younger brother, but his brother was unpretentious and amiable, easy to talk to. Handsome, good-natured, and dependable, his brother had it all. Can't blame the parents for comparing, really. His fiancée, too, was beautiful and seemed quite talented. A stunningly attractive couple. Sitting opposite them, I couldn't help but wonder if I would be compared to his brother's bride-to-be if I married Oliver. During the lively conversation over dinner, "Have you guys decided on a date for the wedding ceremony?" Oliver asked his brother. Then, "We're about to decide. We'd love some suggestions for good venues." The brother and his fiancée replied. Oliver's brother, a promising banker, and his fiancée, working at a securities firm, were both solid professionals. Thinking they would prefer something luxurious, considering they'd invite bosses and work colleagues, I suggested some famous venues where my corporate friends had their weddings. The fiancée searched the venues on her mobile phone, happily engrossed in a page showing a venue with a garden chapel. Then Oliver chimed in. "Hey, why don't we do the wedding ceremony together? How about a restaurant wedding?" And so he had proposed with a casual tone. It was something I had hoped would happen eventually, but I was shocked by his sudden suggestion, especially since he hadn't yet formally met my parents. Then, from somewhere, I heard a distinct sking noise. I couldn't believe it, but it seemed like the sound came from my BIL's fiancée. She was making an incredibly dissatisfied face and muttering under her breath. BIL's girlfriend might be okay with such a ceremony, but I. Then Lucas, Oliver's brother, exclaimed, "Bro, that's a great idea! These kinds of stylish ceremonies are becoming more popular." He seemed genuinely excited about Oliver's suggestion. Being more displeased, the fiancée glared at me more, as if to stop Oliver from saying whatever he wanted. But she was glaring at the wrong person. If she had a problem, I wished she would speak up to the enthusiastic brothers instead. Subsequently, driven by the brothers' excitement, we ended up planning a restaurant wedding, and everything progressed quickly. In a flurry, we managed to greet my parents, and the 4 of us dined out to choose a venue. As days passed, the once disgruntled fiancé warmed up to Oliver, who was now BIL, and they got along so well that one would think they were the couple getting married. However, her attitude towards me remained unchanged. And so, 6 months later, the two couples held their restaurant weddings. After the marriage, I switched from full-time to part-time at work, focusing more on household chores. I left for work after sending Oliver off, returned home earlier to prepare dinner, and waited for Oliver's return. This became my routine. Sometimes, my BIL and his wife, both working full-time, relied on our dinner unexpectedly. It seemed cooking was too much of a hassle for them. Camila, my CL, came with just a token gift, evidently expecting me to cook, sparing herself the effort. At the dinner table, Camila oddly sat next to Oliver instead of her husband, treating me more like a convenient housekeeper. Honestly, their visits were far from welcome. Moreover, she indirectly criticized me, saying I looked plain or that my only talent was messing with flowers. I couldn't stand being demeaned in front of Oliver, but I hated confrontations, so I pretended not to mind Camila's words. Instead, after they left, "Why does she look down on people so much? It's terrible to imply someone's worthless if they don't work at an office." I vented to Oliver. "She's a competent and successful woman. Maybe you're just hearing it that way, Luna. It sounds like you're envious. You shouldn't say things like that." But his response was always defensive of Camila. Oliver, proud of his brother's achievements, seemed unwilling to hear anything negative about his brother's wife. It felt like he was implying I was the problem, listing all of Camila's virtues instead. Recently, my daily life had changed a bit due to Lucas's sudden solo assignment. Camila, too, seemed somewhat reluctant to come uninvited to our dinners alone. With fewer visits from her, I was free from her snide comments and had been able to spend my days more peacefully. But now, a different worry had surfaced. For some reason, Oliver had been coming home late at night, day after day, leaving me to have dinner and go to bed alone. It was really worrying that he had been returning home after midnight so frequently. I hoped he didn't fall ill. One morning, as Oliver hurriedly got ready for work. "You've been coming home late recently. Are you okay? I'm worried you might wear yourself out." I asked him. Oliver didn't even look at me. No need to worry. It's just a contest. I'm busy preparing for a hair contest." He stammered. I haven't heard anything about a hair contest. Usually, he'd make a big deal about entering a hair contest weeks in advance, but this time, nothing. Isn't that strange? Sensing his haste, I asked, "When is this contest? You didn't mention it before. Did you decide to enter suddenly?" Without turning face to me, he replied, "Yeah, that's right. I overlooked the invitation. I've been busy arranging for a cut model and stuff." He didn't even look at me. Come to think of it, when a contest was near, a really cute cut model used to come to the salon after hours. Is she coming this time too? Is it the same cut model you usually have? I asked nonchalantly. Oliver exaggeratedly replied, "Yeah, that's right. I've been keeping her late. Really, I feel so bad about it." His manner of speaking seemed exaggerated. "What is this? This feels so forced. Doesn't his speech sound unnatural?" Despite my feelings. "Is that really okay? It's dangerous to keep a girl late every day, even if you're short on time." When I looked at Oliver, he seemed determined to avoid eye contact. Glancing at his watch, he said, Look at the time. I'm going to be late." Ignoring my words, he hurried out the door. Did he just run away? That reaction was so unnatural. Am I overthinking this? Could it be something with the cut model, an affair? No, that can't be it. The more I thought about it, the worse my thoughts got. After all, such things are unthinkable, aren't they? It's just my bad habit of overthinking. I need to stop that. It's just the late nights because of the hair contest preparations, that's all. Carrying these troubled thoughts, I got ready and headed to work. When I arrived at the shop, Mason, the manager of the salon where Oliver worked, was there picking out flowers for the salon. It was usually Oliver who picked the flowers, so it was unusual to see Mason here. Mason said he leaves the flower selection to Oliver because he doesn't know much about them. Could it be that Oliver asked Mason to pick the flowers to avoid further questions about this morning's conversation? I decided to probe a little. Oliver is participating in a hair contest with you, right? Good luck with that, I said to Mason. But Mason looked confused. Which hair contest? We don't have any such plans, he asked. I also asked about the cut model, but he said they hadn't requested any recently. Apparently, the model was Mason's cousin, who was currently studying abroad. As for the late nights, Mason said that Oliver had been leaving the salon at the regular closing time, so there was no way he had to come home after midnight. It seemed like everything Oliver told me was a lie. So, what had Oliver been doing every night, and with whom? While my suspicion about the cut model was cleared, I still felt uneasy. Stunned and trying to grasp the situation. Should I subtly ask him about it? Mason offered. I thought about accepting Mason's offer, but would Oliver give him a straight answer? I felt like Oliver, being so good at talking, would give vague responses. It seemed more likely that something was going on. I didn't want to give Oliver any chance to concoct an excuse. I had to keep it a secret that I was aware of his lies and probing into the matter. I told Mason that I would handle it myself for now, and asked him to keep our conversation secret, saying I would seek his advice if needed. That night, I decided to wait for Oliver and ask him as if I was oblivious to everything. I doubted he would tell me the truth anyway. Around midnight, Oliver finally came home. While claiming to have been working late, he looked slightly startled when he saw me waiting up. I'm home. I'm exhausted. Finally got the new haircut done, he said, unaware that I knew everything. I wondered what kind of amazing haircut he completed. I asked Oliver, who was trying to mask his nervousness. You must be worn out. Hey, do you mind if I ask something? As I spoke quietly. What's up? What do you want to know? His voice trembled. Are you really working? Are you really preparing for a hair contest? Oliver replied. Well, of course I am. What else would it be? His unease was apparent. He seemed intent on sticking to his lies. In that case. Oh? What about cheating? Yes or no? I asked directly, and his face changed completely. What? Of course I'm not. Oliver began to get defensive. Even the usually eloquent Oliver had no room for jokes. Despite his panic, he tried to weave an escape with desperate excuses. You know, Mason told me. The hair contest is a lie, right? Wouldn't it be better to just come clean? What are you really doing? I cornered him with no escape. Apparently, he had no excuses left and, trembling with clenched fists. Fine. I'll say it. It's an affair. I've fallen in love with someone else, he blurted out. His confession came off as resigned and frustrated. He even started to get angry, as if it was some sort of injustice. I tried to get him to confess who the other person was, but he refused to say, probably because it was someone he shouldn't be involved with. No matter how much I pressed, my anger only grew. Then, I'll hire a detective or whatever it takes to find out. Just be ready. It's Camila. Hearing my words, he went pale and confessed in a defeated tone. Camila? Isn't she Lucas's wife? I was shocked, and he retorted. Yes, Camila. She's pregnant with my child. You haven't had a child with me, but you did with someone else, and that someone is your brother's wife? That's despicable. As I hurled accusations at Oliver, he retorted with unreasonable words. It's your fault for being infertile. Anyway, I'm going to take responsibility and divorce you. His words were infuriatingly unfair. That explained why he always sided with his Sael over me. Are you kidding? Do you even realize what you're saying? Does Lucas know? To have been treated this way by him, I couldn't help but be angry. It doesn't matter. Camila and I won't be separated. She's going to divorce Lucas and be with me. No one can stop us," Oliver declared defiantly. "If you don't like it, then let's get a divorce right now." Disgusted by his words, I retorted. "Don't like it? That's an understatement. I'll gladly divorce you." I decided then and there to cut ties with this hopeless man. The next day, I told everything to my parents, my in-laws, and Lucas, who was at his assignment location. Shocked and furious, they couldn't believe Oliver and Camila had an affair and were expecting a child. Despite their family's reactions, both were unapologetic and brazen. "All this is Asael's fault, right? If she's upset about the affair or didn't notice it, it's her own fault. If Lucas wants to blame someone, he should blame Asael." Camila even had the audacity to put the blame on me. Their lack of remorse disgusted everyone. Lucas decided to divorce Camila, and both Oliver and Camila were disowned by our parents and Lucas. Later, when I reported the situation to Mason, the concerned salon manager, he was one of our recommended hairstylists. "This could affect our salon's reputation. I need to think about what to do with Oliver," he said while crossing his arms. 3 months later, after Camila's remarriage prohibition period ended, she and Oliver got married. Yet, for some reason, I was getting calls from Oliver on my mobile phone. I was at work, and as far as I was concerned, he was a person from my past. I had nothing to say to him, yet he kept calling persistently if I ignored him. Oliver, still somehow keeping his job under Mason's management and working in the beauty salon on the second floor, was someone I don't want showing up at the flower shop. Reluctantly, I answered the call. "Hey, can you help me out here?" His voice was weak and pitiful, a far cry from his earlier bravado. "Why should I? I have no obligation to help you. Can you stop bothering me during work?" As I was about to hang up, "Don't be so cold. Can I come over to talk?" Oliver appeared to really want to talk. Not wanting him to actually come, I decided to listen. It turned out he was in quite a laughable predicament. According to Oliver, on the day they registered their marriage, Camila received a demand for alimony in a divorce lawsuit via a formal notice. "What's this about?" he questioned, and it turned out Camila had been having an affair with her boss, and his wife found out, demanding $50,000 in alimony. Moreover, she was pregnant, and it was unclear whether the child was Oliver's or her boss's. He might end up raising a child that isn't his. "I have no confidence in raising a child that might not be mine. Tell me how to get a divorce." His SOS to me was the last thing I needed. "Just say what you told me," was all the advice I gave. That's it. That was the last call I ever received from Oliver. Nevertheless, both my former sister-in-law and ex-husband were such despicable people. They were both broke after paying us alimony in the divorce suits. Oliver was likely to be fired by Mason now, and with Camila's affair scandal at work, she would probably be fired too, burdened with a hefty debt of $50,000 for alimony. What would they do now? Face bankruptcy? It seemed like a miserable life awaits them, socially and personally obliterated. As for me, I remarried a man who supplies flowers to my shop and am expecting a long-awaited child. I live happily, surrounded by beautiful flowers, a kind and honest husband, and looking forward to holding my lovely child. Despite being called plain, living true to myself is best. I've learned my lesson to stay away from smooth talkers and those who look down on others. Trash housekeeper! Hurry up and prepare the meal! Instead of worrying about me as I collapsed from dizziness, my husband George shoved me away annoyingly and glared at me with irritation. As his attitude drained the color from my face, I slumped to the floor, leaning against it, while he started watching TV, ignoring me completely. Staring blankly at this unbelievable scene, someone suddenly appeared behind George, blurting out words of surprise to him. "Is that all you have to say?" Right after, George turned around to see who it was and his face turned pale with shock. "My name is Marie," I'm a 34-year-old housewife. I've been married to George, who is 5 years my senior, for almost 2 years now. These 2 years have been like living in hell.
What is this disgusting meal? Didn't you learn to cook from my mom?
For the first year of our marriage, I lived with his parents. It was, so to speak, training for marriage. George is an extreme mama's boy, and his mother, Catherine, was what you'd call a zealously educational mom. She was incredibly strict about manners, my rules. No talking back aloud. A perfect example of a parent whose behavior negatively influences their children. A woman should be this way, and it's only natural to respect your husband. A wife who can't prioritize her husband is just useless. Raised in such a family environment, George was looking for a wife like his mom, he murmured when we first got married. Unaware of all this, I was easily swayed by his sweet talk, resulting in a hellish marriage. Marie, what I want for you is to be a devoted wife to George, supporting him. For that, I'll need to be tough on you, to raise you strictly. All of this is to ensure you two can live happily as a couple. Please bear with it. As Catherine declared, from the day we started living together, she used me like a servant. Doing chores was a given, and reading the room was a must. I had to wake up earlier than anyone in the family, and I wasn't allowed to rest until I had sent everyone off to work. I had to start eating after everyone else and finish before them, or I'd be lectured for an hour. Any slight difference in taste would result in being verbally beaten by Catherine and George. They successfully trained me to be a wife who wouldn't dare defy her husband. Now, I'm scared to even express my opinion to him. If he comes home in a low mood, I spend the mealtime trembling in fear. What part of this is a harmonious family life? Now, I only have doubts, but back then, I was completely disheartened and didn't even have the energy to think about it. It's like you can't do any household chores properly. What has your mother taught you? At this rate, it would be easier to train a stray cat. About a week after starting to live in my in-laws' house, Catherine's true nature began to show, and from that moment on, I was subjected to daily sarcastic comments. Cleaning the hallway with a rag was the norm. Not a speck of dust or dirt was allowed. It was natural to serve homemade food to your husband. No matter how hard it was, cutting corners was not allowed. To top it off, I was told to do the laundry by hand. Even though there was a perfectly good drum washing machine right in front of me, I was not allowed to use it.
For a housewife who has time on her hands, seeking convenience is outrageous. A housewife is supposed to suffer through hand pain. You're the first daughter-in-law I've seen who only learns to take it easy.
While complaining loudly, Catherine effortlessly used the drum washing machine right in front of me. Unable to endure the overly harsh environment, I once cried to George for help, but he refused to listen to my concerns.
How could you insult someone's mother like that? What kind of education did you receive to grow up into such a person? My family is perfect. Maybe it's your fault that mom has to discipline you so harshly?
George never acknowledged any fault in his mother. Instead, he frequently misused the word discipline, as if he thought of me as no better than a dog or a cat. Mom is right. There's nothing wrong with what she says. It's like he's a follower. Completely brainwashed, he wouldn't even pretend to listen to me, settling everything with "it's all your fault." This was also reported to Catherine, and from the next day I was forced to go shopping on foot. I was not even allowed to use public transport for shopping trips, no matter how far. I had to walk everywhere. From now on, live your life in a dress. The disorder in your lifestyle stems from your behavior. Welcome your husband home in a dress. Eat all your meals standing up. I won't allow you to sit in a chair. The level of harassment I faced as his wife was beyond what could be dismissed with just a quaint word. I thought about running away, unable to endure any longer, but I had no parents, and my only sibling, my brother Tony, was married and living in India. I had nowhere and no one to turn to for help. I cried every day and night, gradually wearing down mentally. By the time we finished our marriage training and started living together, I was emaciated. I was drained physically and emotionally.
Honey, please. I feel sick. Can you let me go to the hospital?
About a week after we started living together. I hadn't had my period, and I was plagued by daily nausea and headaches. I decided to talk to George about my poor health. There was no chance of pregnancy since we hadn't been intimate since getting married. If not that, then perhaps it was indeed an illness. The headache was too severe to even get up, and my body felt weak and unresponsive like anemia. My condition was clearly severe, beyond what could be endured quietly. When I spoke to him with a pale face, he responded with annoyance and refused my request.
What do you mean by feeling sick? Be specific. You're always lacking in details. Are you even thinking before you speak? Raised spoiled by your parents, that's why you ended up like this. Thinking others will understand your feelings with just a little hint, that's why you can't manage yourself. I'm tired, you know. Don't waste my precious time with your words. Make your point quickly and specifically. Don't irritate me with every little thing.
Hearing his sarcastic complaints made my ears hurt and worsened my headache. I regretted getting married in this insane situation. He never showed any signs of this behavior while we were dating, but as soon as we got married, this happened. He used to be kind, always sincere, and full of charm, popular at work.
Marie is really clumsy and can't be left alone.
I worked at the same company as George. When I got the job at this major company after studying hard, Tony was so happy that he cried. At that time, my parents were still alive. So when I got the job, Tony came back from India for me, and we spent time together as a family.
If you ever have any trouble, call me anytime. Even if we're apart, I'm still your brother.
Tony, 7 years my senior, really doted on me. There were aspects of George that reminded me of Tony, which drew me to him. He was caring, laughed off my clumsiness, sincere, smart, and a reliable big brother figure to everyone. He was someone I admired.
With the headache, nausea, and dizziness, I'll go get some medicine from the hospital, so please, could you give me some money for the consultation?
I couldn't feel a trace of his kindness from back then. Not a speck remained. Now, he seemed like a completely different person. Cruel to the point where the word brutal fits, not seeing me as a person. He looked at me with a scornful gaze, as if he was looking at trash, instilling nothing but fear in me.
It's all just indulgence. What?
I didn't expect to receive any money honestly, but I was at a loss for words at his unexpected response.
Living as a housewife, being pampered, and yet you complain? Where in your lifestyle do you find the cause for dizziness, nausea, headaches? It's all just excuses to avoid doing household chores. That's not. I didn't mean that. Not working outside, and you talk about headaches. That's laughable. Just take some over-the-counter medicine and get over it. I won't allow a waste of money.
The household finances were entirely managed by George's salary. He confessed before we got married that he couldn't do anything around the house and wanted me to handle the household chores as a housewife.
Don't worry about money. Whether we have 3 or 4 kids, I'll earn enough working outside. I want you to do what I can't.
Even I, as unreliable as I was happy to be of help to him. I had no hesitations about leaving my job if it meant being his support. I believed we would have a happy life together. But this was the reality that awaited me. I became like a bird trapped in a cage, forced into a constrained life. Enough, someone, please help me. After George, who wouldn't even consider my illness, stormed out of the living room in anger, I collapsed on the spot and cried. I was overwhelmed by a ceaseless flow of sorrow, lacking the will to fight back. I wanted to disappear. If I had to stay here, I'd rather end my life. Mentally and physically cornered, I left the house without telling him, heading outside. Walking for a while, I unknowingly passed near where my childhood home used to be. Having run out barefoot, I realized my feet were in tatters. I couldn't walk any further. It was a slightly chilly autumn. I was lightly dressed, so the cold wind made me shiver. What would happen if I just let the cold take me? Could I find an easy way to the next world? As I collapsed in front of the empty house that used to be mine, I lay down on the ground. I couldn't think of anything. I didn't want to. I just wanted to disappear. That's when I heard it. Through my hazy consciousness, I heard someone calling me.
Hey! Hold on! Open your eyes!
Feeling a sense of nostalgia for the unknown voice, my consciousness faded away. I woke up to find myself lying on the bed. Having shone an unfamiliar ceiling and slowly opened my eyes to a warm room and the smell of delicious bread. As I tried to sit up and look around to grasp the situation. Awake now? A slightly older man who felt strangely familiar stood there. As I felt wary of this person I didn't recognize, he saw my fear and laughed heartily.
What, you don't remember? Well, no surprise there. It's been over 20 years, after all.
Hearing his cheerful laughter and words, a memory flashed in my mind.
Could it be Mike? Spot on. Long time no see, Marie. I was passing by your family's old house and saw you collapsed. Seriously freaked me out. What were you doing there?
Mike. My childhood friend and Tony's best friend, with whom I used to play until middle school. He moved away when we entered high school, and though we lost touch, he and Tony had remained in contact, and apparently, he had heard a lot about me. Now, he's the owner of a transport company and a father of 2. I never thought Mike would be here.
I was visiting my grandma's grave with my family and decided to take a trip here. More importantly, what happened? You were so cold when I found you, I rushed you to my parents' house.
Mike's wife, Lily, a nurse, had assessed my condition and decided it was safe for me to rest, so they took me to Mike's parents' house. There, he kindly listened to my situation. Lily stayed by my side, crying at the story of a stranger, and hugged me, saying how hard it must have been.
Unforgivable. Someone who can't see others as people should be left immediately.
I also want to escape that house. But I have no relatives or friends to turn to. Lily's words were exactly what I had been thinking. But she understood my situation as well. Tears flowed as I spoke of my hardships, and she was visibly troubled, searching for words.
If you had a place to live and a job, would that solve the problem?
Huh? Hearing our conversation, Mike suddenly asked this, leaving me puzzled, unsure of what he meant. Then, he made a call, and after finishing the conversation, he turned to me with a bright smile.
Marie, we will definitely help you out. So, you're leaving that house. I'll support you.
Confused by what he meant, Mike showed me a reassuring smile, signaling he's got this. Little did I know at that moment, this would be the start of my fight back. After hearing my situation, Mike took me in until my condition stabilized. Lily called George, and probably because it was someone else intervening, he didn't try to forcefully take me back. Being away from George seemed to have stabilized me mentally, and my physical condition improved somewhat. However, Lily strongly suggested I visit a hospital.
Marie tends to endure too much, thinking you can handle it, but don't underestimate the illnesses that come from mental stress. Once this is all settled, we must go to the hospital. I'll come with you.
Her genuine concern was evident, and I gratefully accepted her kindness, prioritizing my rest for the time being. A week passed, and Mike said everything was ready, suggesting we go back to my house once.
If anything happens, call me right away. I have my mobile phone.
Mike, thank you for everything. Encouraged by his dependable words, I decided to return home. Mike accompanied me to the entrance, where George, flustered, welcomed us.
Marie, are you okay? How's your health? Anything wrong?
George, unlike his usual stern self, seemed to be playing the devoted husband, concerned for my well-being. His drastically changed demeanor filled me with fear. He hugged me as if to take me away from Mike, letting out a sigh of relief.
Marie, I was wrong. I failed to empathize with your suffering, and I'm responsible for the pain I caused. I'm truly sorry. Thank you for coming back.
Frozen by his unexpected words, I met Mike's gaze, who silently mouthed "Be strong" to me before discreetly leaving so as not to arouse George's suspicion. Once Mike was out of sight, George stepped back and, ruffling his hair in frustration, let out a big sigh.
You know what you've done, right?
His words, muttered with annoyance, froze me with fear. His tone was now cold, as if he was bothered by the inconvenience I brought. Hesitant to enter, George forcibly pulled me inside and roughly let go of my hand.
Relying on some guy I don't even know. I never thought you were such a shameful woman.
His hurtful words brought tears to my eyes. Despite my resolve to be strong upon returning, his gaze and harsh words made me tremble uncontrollably. I'm scared. I want to leave. It's too hard. As these thoughts swirled in my heart, my vision darkened with dizziness. As I leaned on him, about to fall, he pushed me away in disgust, spitting out words with annoyance.
Stop with the act. I don't even want to touch someone as filthy as you.
Pushed by him, I stumbled against the wall and collapsed in the hallway. Without a care for me, George turned on the TV, lounged on the sofa, and ordered me to do housework.
Housekeeper, get the meal ready. Because of you, I haven't had a decent meal in a week. Cooking and laundry are all you're good for, so hurry up and get it done.
Looking around, I saw piles of laundry and dishes left out. The house in complete disarray. I can't do this anymore. I can't go on with this person. I want a divorce. Just as I thought this, someone approached George from behind and spoke up.
Is that all you have to say?
Shocked by the familiar voice, George slowly turned around to see the person standing there, his face draining of color.
Tony! Why are you here?
There stood Tony, supposed to be in India, his presence bringing panic to George's face.
Never mind that. What the hell have you been doing to my sister, huh?
Tony's intimidating presence made George tremble with fear. Tony, who had been working in civil construction in India, had grown bigger and more robust since leaving the U.S. It was no surprise that George, with his slender frame, would be intimidated by Tony's approach. Especially considering Tony's disdain for people who behave inhumanely. George's actions were unforgivable in Tony's eyes, making his anger entirely justified.
No, I was just educating my wife or guiding her. I never knew that pushing a sick woman was part of educating your wife.
George desperately tried to justify his actions. At that moment, Mike, who had supposedly left, peeked into the living room, flashing a refreshing smile and addressed George.
What are you doing here? How did you get in? How? The door was unlocked. You have to check these things. Even with autolock, it won't work if the door isn't properly closed.
What he pulled out was a thin handkerchief, stained as if it had been wedged in something.
No way!
When you hugged me, I dropped it on the floor so the door wouldn't close. That way, Mike and the others could easily get into the house later. Supported by Lily, I managed to stand up, despite feeling dizzy. George's expression, as he alternated between looking at me and Tony, was filled with panic and fear. Realizing the trick Mike and I had used to enter and that this had been planned from the start left George in shock. He had always left security concerns to me, so it was clear he wouldn't have checked the lock himself, assuming the door would lock automatically. He never worried about it, which was easy to predict.
I've heard all about it from Marie and Mike. You seem to have taken good care of my sister while I was in India. I've recorded this entire conversation. Marie has been meticulously keeping a diary of everything, and we've recorded all texts and calls from you. All of it has been submitted to a lawyer. We'll be demanding compensation for everything, including Marie's health issues. From now on, you'll deal with a lawyer regarding the divorce. Don't you dare come near our family ever again.
Everyone glared at George, protecting me and ensuring he had no allies. Tony spoke for me, preventing George's sweet words from swaying me. Hearing the word divorce, George became frantic, reaching out to cling to me. Wait. Please reconsider the divorce. I can't live without Marie. I need her to survive. George desperately tried to portray himself as pitiful. It was clear he needed me for various reasons, but his words no longer reached me. His true intention was to use me, to live comfortably at my expense, and to vent his frustrations on me. I knew what his sweet words really meant, and I wouldn't be fooled again. Mike and Tony bravely intervened to stop George's desperate attempts to win me back. From behind them, I finally voiced my long-suppressed feelings towards George with a coldness I had never shown before.
With you, I never had a moment of happiness in our marriage. It was a daily struggle, thinking only of escaping. Who would want to stay in such a home? I want nothing to do with you from now on. Don't you dare come near me or my loved ones ever again.
Perhaps because I had never shown my emotions like this before, George stopped resisting in shock. Overwhelmed by the reality before him, he collapsed, drained of all strength. Thus, I was finally freed from George's malevolence and decided to move to India with Tony. After things settled down, I went straight to the hospital with Lily by my side and was diagnosed with depression. Mike suggested that it would be best for my recovery to stay at his place for a while before starting a new life, and I gratefully accepted his offer. We're here for you. You can rely on us for anything.
If that husband of yours tries to barge in, I'll kick him out myself. Just leave it to me.
Tony and I deeply appreciated their reassuring words and kindness. The reason for Tony's return to US was a call from Mike, who had been on the phone with Tony at that time, informing him of my situation and convincing him to come back immediately.
Why didn't you rely on me?
Although Tony scolded me upon his return, knowing I struggled to ask for help, he also apologized for not coming to check on me sooner in US and hugged me tightly, apologizing repeatedly. Thanks to Tony's quick actions in arranging a lawyer and accommodation, the situation was resolved smoothly. From now on, live with us over there. Learning a foreign language might be tough, but my wife and friends will give you all the support you need, so don't worry." Saying so, Tony offered me a job at his company, where his colleagues welcomed me warmly. As for George, he and his mother were sued for moral harassment by us and are now chased by debts. After explaining everything to my former colleagues before leaving US, George lost his position at his company. Losing his credibility, life at the company became difficult for him, leading to his resignation. He now lives at his parents' home, scraping by on day-to-day jobs. He sent me a letter of apology which said the incident taught him that bad actions come back to haunt you. But of course, I couldn't trust his words and made sure to receive compensation from him. My long-living health finally came to an end. Now I live a comfortable and joyful life in India, surrounded by kind people. I'll leave the kid for you to take care. As I wondered what he meant, Thomas uttered something unbelievable. Apparently, he was taking advantage of our current separation to live with his affair partner. He wanted to divorce me, right after my mother passed away, to marry his mistress. I had heard that separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim compensation for infidelity after separating. Not caring anymore, I hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. But I thought his actions were despicable and didn't respond, just blocked his number. However, Thomas was persistent. He even sent texts through social media, which he normally never uses. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas.
"Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell."
Thomas, who didn't even attend my mother's funeral and was planning an elopement with his mistress, didn't deserve any sympathy. I was determined to pay him back double for everything he had done to us. My name is Sandra, a 46-year-old part-time worker and a housewife. My family consists of my husband Thomas, a year older than me, and our 16-year-old daughter in high school, Margaret. We lived in a small apartment in the countryside. I got married when I was 23, but after discovering I was infertile, it took 5 years of fertility treatments to finally have our long-awaited daughter. But after Margaret was born, I struggled with first-time parenting. Gradually, I lost my peace of mind and left the company I worked for, temporarily becoming a full-time housewife. In our society, whenever Margaret got sick, I, her mother, was called to accompany her to the hospital. This was what led me to quit my job. It wasn't that I hated caring for Margaret, but my boss indirectly suggested I resign, and I couldn't bear it and ran away. Eventually, staying at home all the time seemed depressing, so I put Margaret in daycare and started earning a bit as a part-time worker. Both Thomas and I couldn't forget the hardship of 5 years of fertility treatment, and we eventually settled on having just Margaret. I first noticed something was off with Thomas when Margaret was in upper elementary school. Margaret was academically gifted, so I really wanted her to try for private middle school. Margaret was positive about the idea of middle school entrance exams, and we even attended open campus events together to choose the best school. Thomas earned enough for us to live comfortably, even with me as a housewife. Plus, I was prepared to use my savings from before marriage or untouched part-time earnings for Margaret's education funds. But Thomas was adamantly against it. No. He was unyielding in his refusal to let Margaret take the exams.
What's the point of a middle school entrance exam?
Let her go to a regular middle school, that's enough for Margaret.
Isn't the entrance exam something for daughters of company presidents or something?
No matter how I tried to convince him, Thomas stubbornly refused. Finally, losing patience, I told Margaret,
"You can take the exam if you want. I want to support what you want to do. Just focus on your studies without any worries."
But Margaret just shook her head, looking sorry. She probably hated seeing us argue over her future. That's when I realized it. I shouldn't be showing this side of us to our child. I started to be extra careful not to get into intense arguments with Thomas for Margaret's sake. That marked the beginning of a life walking on eggshells around Thomas. But the more I tried to be careful, the more sensitive I became, and even trivial things would turn into arguments. Hey, I've been meaning to say this for a while. Isn't this stew too salty? I've always hated this kind of seasoning. Thomas suddenly confessed that he never liked my cooking. After our argument about the entrance exam, it seemed like he no longer held back. He started criticizing without care. For example, he started saying he didn't like Worcestershire sauce or that he always hated the tomatoes in his sandwiches. He kept going on about it at the dinner table, making me feel quite bad. So, reluctantly, I stopped adding tomatoes, which I used to make the dishes look good, and carrots, which he also said he didn't like. I don't want your lunch anymore. It doesn't look good and I lose my appetite. I responded to his requests, but to that he threw away the lunch I made. Fed up with his constant complaints, I finally exploded in anger.
Then eat out. If you're going to complain that much, I won't make your sandwiches ever again.
And from that point on, I stopped making sandwiches for Thomas altogether. A turning point came sometime later. It was when Margaret, who was attending a public middle school, was about to face high school entrance exams. Despite attending public school, she participated in an archery club outside of school and achieved a national competition placement. Margaret was also academically successful and skilled at piano, a hobby I had introduced to her. She always looked forward to her weekly lessons. She was an all-rounder, diligent, and even serving as the vice president of the student council. Although I had reluctantly made her give up on middle school entrance exams, I hoped this time she could attend the high school of her choice. When I asked about her preferred high school, she named a renowned private school within the state. I wasn't sure if I should say it, but I really want to go here. It's a prestigious school for archery, and I'll work hard for it. I nodded emphatically at Margaret's words. Margaret had started to accommodate her father Thomas, always putting herself last. She would decline offers to buy books or clothes she wanted. It's okay. Even when I gave her these as birthday gifts, she looked apologetic. Seeing my child like this filled me, as a mother, with a sense of helplessness. That's why I wanted to make her bravely spoken dream a reality. I reassured her that we could afford it with my savings and education insurance. However, when I informed Thomas about Margaret's educational aspirations, predictably, he flatly refused. No way. Attending a private high school in the state means she can't commute from here. So, she'll need a dorm or an apartment, right? I won't allow it, it's a waste of money. His words infuriated me. Calling the education expenses for our only daughter a waste? I couldn't hold back.
You opposed to her middle school exams too. Why do you always say such things? Doesn't she deserve to live her life the way she wants?
But my words seemed to have no effect on Thomas. He sighed theatrically and exclaimed,
No, private school and living alone as a high school student are a waste of money. If she doesn't go to a local public high school, I won't support you guys financially anymore.
At that moment, I snapped.
Fine, have it your way. But don't complain about whatever we decide to do.
I'll figure it out, so you go ahead and apply to the high school you want. There's no need for you to compromise this time. Okay? Do as you wish. I encouraged Margaret again, but she looked worried. But she hesitated. Even so, I repeatedly reassured her.
It's okay.
And it seemed that Margaret had made up her mind. The following spring, Margaret successfully got into her first choice high school.
Mom, I did it.
Margaret returned from school with a beaming smile and shared the news. There's no parent who wouldn't be overjoyed at their child's successful high school entrance. I made a red velvet cake and praised her like crazy. Although there were tough times, she had done well. However, Thomas, not celebrating this achievement, said something awful. As promised, you take care of Margaret and yourself from now on. I won't contribute to the household expenses anymore. And just like that, he coldly stated his decision and stopped providing for the household expenses. Margaret would be moving into the high school dormitory soon. For me, knowing that my parenting phase was somewhat coming to an end and having already decided to work as a regular employee at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, I didn't think I would struggle financially. Therefore, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Months had passed since Margaret started high school. She had adapted to her new life, and I was relieved to hear that. I was working part-time, similar to full-time hours, at a hospital where an acquaintance worked, with an expectation of being made a full-time employee soon. I thought we wouldn't struggle financially. Thus, Thomas's words and actions didn't bother me anymore. Although Thomas and I hadn't divorced yet, we had been living separately for months after he moved out to a different apartment. I was busy with my new life, but realizing I could live without Thomas, I planned to divorce him as soon as everything was ready. I assumed Thomas wouldn't want to continue this separation forever either. Believing this separation would end one way or another, I went to the city office to get divorce papers. But then, I received devastating news. My mom back home had passed away. When I got the call from my dad, I was so shocked that I collapsed. Mom had always been frail, in and out of hospitals since I was young. I remembered praying with Dad for her successful surgeries. I knew she had been battling cancer for a year now and understood that her time was limited. Still, the news of her passing was hard to accept. Dad, having lost his lifelong partner, looked utterly defeated and downcast. He clearly lacked the strength to act as the representative of the family at the funeral. So, I stepped up to take on that role. Being an only child, there was no one else who could do it. Dad weakly smiled at my offer. "That would be a great help," he said in a faint voice. We hadn't told anyone about our separation, not even Dad or our acquaintances. So, I thought it best to invite Thomas to the funeral. I quickly sent him a text with details about Mom's passing and the funeral arrangements. As expected, there was no reply. On the day of the funeral, Thomas didn't show up, and Margaret, who had come home for the occasion, muttered, "He's the worst." Even Dad, who looked so frail, was angry, feeling insulted for his wife and daughter. I had my own grievances against Thomas, but now wasn't the time for that. "Both of you, I feel the same way. But do you want to send her off with angry faces? Mom always said, nothing can beat a smile, didn't she?" My words reminded Dad and Margaret of Mom's cheerful nature. We managed to regain our composure and give Mom a proper send-off. That night, Thomas finally called back, but with an insensitive remark. "I'll leave the kid for you to take care." In such a situation, what was he thinking? As I silently pondered, Thomas, unasked, began to talk volubly. "Let me put it simple. I'm planning to elope with my girlfriend. She's younger and cuter than you." Apparently, he was living with his mistress, using our separation to his advantage, and wanted to divorce me right after my mom's death so he could marry her. I've heard separation is often treated like divorce, making it hard to claim alimony for infidelity afterwards. But for me, such things didn't matter anymore. "Oh, really? Do as you please," I replied and hung up the phone. 3 days later, I had 23 missed calls from Thomas on my mobile phone. Thinking how despicable he was, I didn't respond and blocked his number. When he realized I wasn't going to answer the phone, he started sending apologies through social media. That's when I decided to fight back against Thomas.
"Fine, if that's how you want it, I'll show you hell."
Thomas had declared abandoning me and Margaret at the time of my mother's funeral, and on top of that, he was planning an elopement with his mistress. Mercy was unnecessary for someone like him who had mistreated us. I decided to pay him back double for everything he had done. I immediately texted to Thomas.
"Let's meet tomorrow."
The next day, I waited for Thomas at the cafe where we had agreed to meet. A few minutes later, Thomas arrived in a hurry, his face pale and clearly agitated. I had nothing to say to him. So, I just silently, or perhaps glaringly, stared at him. Thomas, unnerved by my uncharacteristically explicit attitude, slowly began to speak. "I truly regret not being able to attend your mom's funeral. but there's a reason. I'm a bit shaken, it was just bad timing. Curious, I listened to his explanation. Apparently, one of Thomas's relatives had collapsed and was in critical condition, needing surgery to have a chance of survival.
So what? If surgery is the only option, then just do it. What does that have to do with anything else?
Thomas's face twisted in anguish as he replied. It's a complex surgical procedure that can't be done in a normal hospital. So, it's going to be expensive, and insurance won't cover it. According to Thomas, it was an advanced medical operation that had to be paid entirely out of pocket. His family decided to pool money, and Thomas had to contribute around $10,000. I was astounded. How could he so easily spin such lies?
It's not Betty or Richard, it's some relative I've never even met, right?
When I coldly responded, Thomas turned red with anger.
Don't be so cold. You, who just lost your mother, should understand my feelings.
I understood, but it was an entirely different issue.
First of all, the timing of your relative's illness right after my mother's death is suspicious. And is it really a disease that requires advanced medical treatment? What's the diagnosis? How much will the surgery cost in total?
As I pressed him with my thoughts, Thomas stumbled over his words and fell silent. My family, being well-known local landowners, had savings close to $1 million, which I was aware of. Even though Thomas might not know the details, he knew my family was wealthy, so I suspected he was after the inheritance. Given his past behavior, I couldn't trust him, even if he genuinely needed a significant amount of money for a medical issue. I sighed exaggeratedly and then continued.
What you and I need to discuss are divorce, custody, and division of assets.
That's all. But then Thomas pleaded.
Wait. I'll never do anything to make you sad again. Reconsider, please.
His face was contorted, clearly desperate to change the situation. I spoke again, more firmly.
I can't have any hope for a future with you anymore. If you feel sorry, please proceed with the divorce.
Saying that, I stood up, paid only for my coffee, and left. That night, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at our house.
Hey, I know you're in there, open the door.
When Thomas left to start our separation, he said he'd never return and left the keys, so naturally, he couldn't get in. However, at that moment, I was in the bathroom and didn't notice Thomas's arrival. It appeared that Margaret had responded instead, and when I noticed something was amiss and went to the front door, I saw the two of them. Margaret was home for the summer holidays, and had been staying with us since the funeral. What I saw was Thomas deeply apologizing and Margaret standing tall, looking down on him.
What's going on?
Thomas, what are you doing here? Thomas looked up, begging for forgiveness.
Please, I'm begging you. Can you just lend me $10,000 as an advance on the property division?
I thought he had come to apologize, but he was still asking for money. It became clear that Thomas didn't care about me or Margaret. Frustrated, I almost let my anger take over but managed to hold back. I wanted to yell and drive him away, but I knew running away wasn't an option anymore. For Margaret's sake, this separation needed to be resolved quickly. After taking a deep breath to calm myself, I said to Thomas,
That's irrelevant now. I already told you I wouldn't help you out with that. We handled my mother's funeral with my relatives, and you were not involved. Therefore, I don't see any need to care for a relative of yours I've never met.
Thomas seemed to lose his words in response, as if he had nothing to say back. Thomas had always been hands-off with my family matters, whether it was hospitalization or funerals. Yet, now that he was in a bind, he wanted my help, which was far too convenient. Realizing that nothing he said would change my mind, Thomas turned to Margaret.
Margaret, you tell Mom too. To you, a relative of your father is family too, right? Come on, please. You're kind-hearted, you'd feel bad knowing a family member is sick, right?
Typically quiet, and when he did speak it was usually sarcastic, but in such moments, Thomas became talkative. And now, he was clinging to the daughter he tried to abandon for his mistress, having not even paid for her high school. I felt a headache coming on. I endured a lot for Margaret's sake, but maybe it would have been better to have divorced from the start and lived just the two of us. But it was too late for regrets now. I wondered what Margaret was thinking. Maybe she'd be moved by her father's words and try to persuade me. But as embarrassing as it was for me to have even considered that for a moment, Margaret responded with a resolute expression. "Who are you?" Both Thomas and I were stunned by her response. It wasn't rejection or comfort, but a denial of his very existence. Watching Margaret's composed face, I felt relieved. Impressed by the strength of my grown-up daughter, Margaret continued without looking at Thomas.
You said you're leaving the kid to mom, right? So, you've essentially abandoned your parental rights. You're divorcing mom and going with your mistress, aren't you?
It seemed Margaret had overheard my phone conversation with Thomas. I thought I had been discreet, but she must have had her own thoughts about her father not attending the funeral. To her, a man who was separated and unfaithful, saying he didn't need her, was nothing more than a stranger. She declared him an outsider. That left Thomas utterly devastated, frozen in place. Margaret sighed deeply and glared at him.
After all the obstacles you've put in my path, don't try to act like a father now. To me, the only parent is mom. I don't care about someone who didn't even show up for my beloved grandmother's funeral.
Thomas stayed motionless for a while, but gradually seemed to grasp Margaret's words. Rising up with a furious look, he stared at Margaret.
You ungrateful child! Do you know how much I've sacrificed for you? If you're going to say that, then pay back all the school fees I've paid up till middle school.
How childish was he? Who demands repayment for raising their own child? It made me nauseous to think he was my husband. Thomas, about to say something more, stepped closer to us. Margaret, sensing fear, stepped back. But just then, we heard the siren of a police car and saw it stop in front of the apartment. Thomas halted his advance and slowly turned around. Outside, the people I faced were our neighbors, their expressions even more daunting than Thomas's. Caught up in the commotion with Thomas, I hadn't realized I left the front door open. The walls of the apartment are thin, and many people were home during the evening hours. A neighbor, having heard the ruckus, apparently called the police. When Thomas realized the police were there for him, he became visibly flustered, losing all his previous bravado. The officers stepped out of the patrol car and came straight to us to inquire about the situation. Our neighbors had reported Thomas as a suspicious person. I've always had a good relationship with my neighbors. And when I mentioned my mother's funeral, they even said, "Please let us pay our respects." So they attended, and noticing that Thomas was absent, I had candidly explained. Remembering how they had unanimously condemned Thomas's absence and behavior recently, it was no surprise they called the police when they heard him causing a scene. Thomas always said neighborhood relations were unnecessary, but in that moment, I was grateful for our close-knit community. And the police didn't irresponsibly leave the scene unresolved. Thomas desperately tried to clear up the misunderstanding.
I'm the head of this household. What's wrong with a husband returning to his wife and daughter's home? This is just a little family disagreement, nothing that needs to trouble the police.
That's what he was pleading. His earnest plea only sparked a chorus of boos from onlookers. The officer calmed the crowd and then asked me if Thomas's claims were true. I answered honestly.
I'm embarrassed to say, but we are currently separated. My husband already has someone else, and we were ready for divorce. I've even prepared the divorce papers.
The officer believed my story and instructed Thomas to return to his current residence. The neighbors, who had been watching from a distance, emanated an aura of go back home already. Thomas still seemed eager to argue, but I told him,
this won't solve anything. Besides, when we separated, this house was transferred to my name, and I've been paying the rent. Don't just barge in.
He had no reply to that. Margaret then chimed in, echoing my sentiment.
Officer, I'm scared of this man.
That seemed to be the final straw. The police, recognizing the need to protect Margaret, a minor, firmly told Thomas,
"Dad, it's time to go home."
Facing the backlash, Thomas realized his efforts were futile and dejectedly left. 2 weeks have passed since Thomas's visit. I consulted a lawyer about the incident and decided to proceed with the divorce, seeking their assistance. Given Thomas's behavior, a straightforward discussion seemed unlikely. The lawyer agreed, confirming my decision was right. Finally, the day came to speak with Thomas again. He appeared dejected, but I unceremoniously handed him the documents without a word. Thomas browsed through them, puzzled at first, but his expression turned to one of shock.
"Wait, what is this? How did you find this out?"
The document detailed a compensation claim against Thomas and his mistress. All of Thomas's previous behavior was a facade. While it was true he had an affair, the woman had instigated him to play a part.
If the mother-in-law had passed away, Sandra will inherit something, right? Just shake her up a bit, and she'll probably want to settle with money. It'll be easier for us to get married. How about getting around $10,000?
The story about needing money for advanced medical treatment for a sick family member was a lie. It was a fictional scenario created to swindle money from me. I had felt uneasy about the whole situation. After the funeral, Thomas had called nonchalantly, ready to break up, but then suddenly turned desperate by dawn. I suspected there was more to it. The timing was too convenient. Trusting my intuition, right after Thomas's call, I secretly hired a private investigator to conduct a background check. With Thomas openly admitting his affair, he made no attempt to hide his infidelity, making gathering evidence straightforward. Furthermore, emboldened by his admission, he was captured toasting with his mistress.
"To our 5th anniversary, cheers!"
This meant Thomas had been having an affair for 5 years, even before our separation when our marriage wasn't yet in disarray. This meant I could claim compensation. Confronted with his lies exposed, Thomas began to tremble. His hands weakened, dropping the stack of papers on the desk. His eyes became vacant, his mouth moving as if searching for words. After 5 minutes, he managed to utter, "What should I do?" I leaned forward as if I had been waiting for those words.
"I'll be claiming $30,000 from you as compensation for the affair and the emotional distress you've caused me. And from the other woman, $10,000.
These amounts were the maximum claimable according to standard rates. Thomas panicked at the hefty sum.
"I can't pay that. I mean, if I do, it will ruin my life."
His excuses were expected. So, I presented an alternative.
"Then let's settle it with compensation in the form of property division. But child support is a separate matter. You'll pay for all of Margaret's expenses, including her high school and future college fees."
Faced with Thomas's refusal, I pressed on.
"If you default, I'll go to court for enforcement. Your employer will be notified, and the amount will be deducted from your salary."
Faced with this reality, Thomas reluctantly signed the documents my lawyer had prepared. This marked the end of our long battle. Afterwards, Thomas and I officially divorced, and the financial matters were settled through compensatory property division. Thomas had nearly no savings due to funding his mistress. So in the end, I was only able to protect the savings I had diligently amassed. Naturally, Thomas ended up with nothing from the divorce, a significant blow to him. Concerned about his employer finding out, he has been diligently paying child support every month. Margaret, as if to spite him, studied hard and got accepted into a prestigious private university. I can only imagine the look on Thomas's face when he received the bill for her tuition. His mistress, shortly after paying me the compensation, was arrested and convicted on charges of marriage fraud. It turns out she had other partners besides Thomas, promising marriage to each of them. Thomas really lacked judgment. Thomas, having lost his family, money, and mistress, and as well as his relationships with relatives and friends, would not have ventured into an affair if he had known it would lead to such despair. He lacked such foresight. Now, he leads a lonely life of just working and going home, paying child support every month. Apparently, his colleagues and neighbors knew about his situation, and he faces their cold stares, living in misery. Never underestimate the power of rural gossip network. Thomas learned this the hard way. Meanwhile, I returned home to support my dad, leading a peaceful life. One day, as my daughter was nearing her college graduation, she brought home a young man who seemed very pleasant.
He's my boyfriend.
Dad, moved to tears at the prospect of Margaret's marriage, and I finally felt a sense of relief. Months later, as I helped Margaret with her veil on her wedding day, she said to me with tears in her eyes,
"Mom, thank you for raising me. I promise I'll live a happy life."
Attending my beloved daughter Margaret's wedding filled me with joy. Having parted ways with a terrible husband and seeing Margaret in her wedding dress was more than enough to fill my heart. I decided to cherish every minute and second for the rest of my life.
First, take this $20 and go to the hospital, because I promised Mom I'd do something for her first.
My husband said, pulling out the bill and handing it to me. I was completely taken aback by this unexpected turn of events and could only stand there dumbfounded, watching him drive away. Incredibly, he had chosen to leave his wife, who was in pain from her water breaking, to prioritize taking his mother to her hobby class. Despite the harassment I had suffered from my mother-in-law, Mary, and the tough times she put me through, I had always endured it, thinking of our unborn child. But now it was clear to me. A person who disregards their child like this doesn't deserve to be a parent. I steeled myself to face childbirth alone, enduring the increasing pains. I am Jane. Tom, whom I married right after graduating from college, is 3 years older than me, and we lead a reasonably happy married life. He was a senior at the club I belonged to in college. He seemed to have fallen in love with me at first sight when I joined as a new member, and looking back, I was embarrassingly overwhelmed by his passionate approach. As a young adult, just being a senior made him seem irresistibly cool, and I responded to his approach. We dated smoothly from 3 months after I enrolled until graduation. Even after marriage, Tom was head over heels in love with me, so I never worried about him cheating. He proudly tells his colleagues how happy he is to come home on time every day and eat the meals I cook while they're still warm, so I doubt any woman would purposely approach him. However, Tom has always been particularly kind to women, and naturally, some were drawn to him. But he has always been devoted to me, and I've never been attracted to any other man. However, there's a reason why I initially described our marriage as reasonably happy. That reason is my mother-in-law, Mary. I thought mother-in-law problems were a thing of the past, but Mary frowned the moment she saw me.
"What's with your hair? Looks like you dumped paint on it. Let me guess, you dyed it in a hurry last night, trying to look innocent? It's embarrassing. Can you leave my son and go home for today? Seriously, you knew we were meeting. You should have taken care of your hair earlier."
When I first visited Tom's family before we got married, Mary said this, and I, still young, turned pale with fear. Just as Mary said, I realized the day before that my hair color was too bright, so I dyed it with Tom's help. Feeling embarrassed and frustrated at being seen through, I was down for a while after that. It was my fault for the breach of etiquette, but I wouldn't have been so upset if Mary had been a bit more restrained in her comments. Because of my hair color, I felt like I was being pushed away from Tom and was sent back home alone from my first visit to his family, so Tom called me later.
"Mom was just nervous and came off too harsh. She actually likes you, Jane, so don't worry. She's in favor of our marriage and really wants you to visit home again."
This time, I was irritated with Tom's carefree talk. He didn't stop Mary from making snide remarks right in front of me, and he even seemed to be defending her. There's no doubt Mary doesn't genuinely want me at her house. Would I be pressured to live with them after marriage and face daily harassment? Surprisingly, when we got married, Mary didn't suggest anything like that. I was relieved, but soon after, Mary began frequently inviting Tom to her home. "Now that you've finally graduated from a far-off university and got a job here, you get married right away. I've been so lonely. Why don't you let Jane rest and stay here for about a week?" Messages like this would arrive for Tom, and I shivered. Showing me the message, Tom asked, "What do you think?" Instead of answering, I called Mary right there. "I'm sorry, but we haven't finished unpacking and the paperwork isn't done yet either. It'll be a while before Tom can relax. I apologize." When I said this, Mary replied with nagging words. "Do the unpacking yourself? Don't always rely on my son." But I just nodded along and ended the call. Mary's offer to let me rest was just a facade. She wanted her dear son by her side. I was annoyed with Mary for lacking consideration, especially as newlyweds, and also upset with Tom for not refusing. According to Tom, Mary has always been like this. Her overprotectiveness worsened after she divorced Tom's father. When Tom decided to go to college, she cried and tried to stop him. Somehow he convinced her and went to college, but they communicated via messages and calls almost every night. Tom trusts his mother, who raised him as a single mom, so they've always had a good relationship. It's fine to be a caring child and mother, but there should be an appropriate distance between adults. And I understand it's not good to interfere with another family's dynamics. He was serious about his job and chores and had a nice personality, so for a while, I tried to come to terms with it. But it wasn't long before I began to question the uncomfortably close relationship between the two of them. One holiday, my usually late-sleeping husband woke up earlier than me and started preparing to go out, so I asked, "Did we have plans to go somewhere today?" "Mom and I are going shopping, Jane." "You can keep sleeping," he replied with an unbelievable answer. Apparently, Mary wanted to buy clothes and asked Tom to come along so she could ask for his opinion. I got angry again at my husband for agreeing without hesitation, but tried to stay calm. "You finally have a day off. Let's do something together." I tried to keep him walking out the door. But he shook his head and replied, "I'd like that, but I already promised Mom, and she seems to be waiting outside already." Shocked by his words, I headed to the entrance in my pajamas. Looking out the window to the garden, I saw Mary's bright red car parked there. Noticing my gaze, Mary turned around and smirked as she got out of the car. "Tom, you're late. Jane's a stay-at-home wife and still asleep at this hour? Pathetic. Should I buy you an alarm clock on our way home today?" Mary, with her bright red lipstick matching her car, laughed heartily and affectionately took my husband's hand, leading him to the passenger seat. I was dumbfounded watching their cozy interaction and could only watch as Mary's car sped away cheerfully. After this incident, my husband's behavior started to change gradually. He almost stopped doing the household chores he used to do naturally and began going to his family's house almost every weekend. His attitude towards me also changed, becoming more domineering. "Jane, you're too lazy. When I have a day off, you just sleep with me, right? Can you call that being a housewife? You even stopped putting on makeup at home. That's not good after getting married. Mom is worried about you, too. Why don't you visit her alone once in a while?" I don't know what Mary has been saying about me, but my husband agreeing with her is absurd. He never mentioned anything about naps or makeup during our courtship. But as my husband says, maybe Mary really is concerned about my behavior. I tried to convince myself of this several times, but knowing how Mary treats my husband like a lover, I can't help but see it as harassment towards me. However, I thought Mary's curse would change once we had a child. I found out I was pregnant shortly after I started having doubts about my husband's behavior. His eyes lit up with joy. And he held my hand, promising to work through it together. But Mary's harassment got worse after this, indirectly forcing my husband to leave me alone for trivial reasons like shopping, hospital visits, or cleaning her house. I tried explaining to my husband that Mary's actions were malicious towards me, but it backfired. He suddenly snapped with anger. "Mom always talks about you when we meet. She says you should go back to your parents' house or take time for yourself. Getting angry over this will affect the baby in your stomach. You should appreciate Mom's concern." He started leaving me alone more often. As morning sickness worsened, I told him I was anxious being alone and wanted him to be with me as much as possible. But to my cry for help, his reply was unbelievable. "Even if I'm around, there's nothing I can do for you. Mom said she wanted to be alone all the time during her pregnancy and didn't even want to see Dad." He wouldn't listen to me. And feeling physically and emotionally unstable, I resolved to fight alone. Then, one day while shopping for baby items with my husband, we bumped into one of his colleagues.
Tom, I hear you're actively attending parenting classes. Your home library is full of parenting books, right? Today, too, accompanying your wife for shopping, you're going to be a great dad. Can't wait for your child to be born."
I was so shocked that I blurted out.
"What?"
Tom quickly interjected, laughing.
"Stop it, man."
Turns out, he's been pretending to be a devoted new father at work, making up stories. I kept quiet to avoid a scene with the colleague, but inside, I was seething with anger. He continued to prioritize Mary, and occasionally, when I ran into his colleagues, they'd envy me.
"Jane, you found the ideal husband."
These incidents gradually made me start distrusting my husband's words and actions. I can't say for sure if the stress caused it, but one weekend, while I was making lunch, I noticed my pants were wet. A certain thought crossed my mind, so I rushed to the bathroom. And sure enough, I realized my water had broken. I headed to the bedroom where my husband was still sleeping and yelled to get the car ready right away. My husband, groggy at first, quickly helped me walk by supporting me under my arm when he learned my water had broken. The nurses had repeatedly told me to come to the hospital immediately if my water broke. There might be urgent danger, so my husband was also somewhat panicked. In the midst of labor pains, we finally managed to get into the car and started driving when my husband's mobile phone rang. Unable to answer while driving, I peeked at the screen amidst my pain. When I saw Mary's name, I intuitively had a bad feeling. I glared at the screen for a while, but the ringing continued the entire time. Thinking it would be quicker to explain the situation, I reluctantly answered the phone. "Tom, where are you?" "It's Wednesday, it's the day for my craft class? Did you forget?" Mary's voice, never used when talking to me, sent chills down my spine, but I explained to her.
"Mary, actually, my water just broke, and I'm on my way to the hospital with Tom."
As soon as I spoke, Mary's tone changed dramatically, and she started yelling at me.
"That's your own problem. I don't care. How dare you use your resting husband as a taxi? Put Tom on the phone. Today is the fixed day for my craft class. I had the appointment first."
Stunned, I couldn't believe Mary was saying such things, not even concerned about her grandchild. I remained silent, but Mary's shrill voice continued. "Sorry, Jane," my husband muttered. For a moment, I thought he was apologizing for Mary's outburst. But then, I realized he had walked around to the back seat where I was lying and was opening the door. Confused and in pain, I was speechless. Then my husband said something unbelievable. "I had promised to drive Mom, so can you take a taxi or ambulance from here? I'll definitely catch up later." That's the plan.
Wait. Are you prioritizing your craft class over your own child? I can't convince Mary, so you talk to her. The pain is getting worse, hurry up.
I was desperate, so I raised my voice. But my husband frowned and said, "It's a regular commitment. It can't be helped. I'm sorry I forgot to tell you about it. Here's some money, please manage with this." He took $20 from his wallet and stuffed it into my bag. Then, he went back to the driver's seat and left me there without hesitation. I can't believe this. I was still close to our house. Not wanting to be seen by neighbors, I quickly looked up for a taxi. Amniotic fluid continued to trickle down my legs, and I panicked about the baby's safety. Tears welled up in frustration as I stared at my mobile phone, trembling with pain, wondering why we had to endure this.
"Jane!"
Startled by my name being called, I turned around and saw a familiar face.
What's wrong? You look terrible. Don't worry about talking, just get in.
This person gently supported me and helped me into the back seat of their car. Her husband adjusted the seat for me as he sat in the driver's seat. After that, my memory is fuzzy. I was rushed into a wheelchair at my regular hospital and taken to a prepared hospital room. The pain was so intense that I groaned, but I was told there was still time before the birth, so I rested there. I endured the overwhelming pain that occasionally threatened to make me lose consciousness when suddenly, my mobile phone rang. Thinking it might be a callback from my mother, who I had called on the way, I was shocked to find it was my husband. Looking at the clock, it was already evening. 3 hours had passed, and now he arrives? I decided not to answer. But after continuous ringing, I picked up the phone, irritated.
Jane! Help me! I want you to explain the situation.
Not even a word of concern for me, and now he wants help? Even if he was about to be eaten by a crocodile, I had no obligation to help the man who abandoned his child and me.
Who do you think you are? How dare you say such things?
I yelled at my husband through the mobile phone and then hung up. After a while, I faced childbirth alone. I would have liked to have my reliable husband holding my hand at such a time, but it's better off without a foolish husband who can't even prioritize things right. Instead, I received support from the kind nurses, and by nightfall, my long-awaited baby was born. Both mother and child were safe, and I fell asleep quickly due to the exhaustion. The next morning, the first thing the nurse told me when she came into my room was that my husband had come. Apparently, he came right after the birth, but since I was sleeping so deeply, the nurse kindly sent him back home. Honestly, I thought I would never want to see my husband again. But when he entered the room looking so haggard, I couldn't help but ask what happened. The person who had helped me in my suffering and taken me to the hospital yesterday was N, a neighbor I had always been close with. She had taken care of me like her own daughter since her son was about the same age as me, and she had been a great support to me when I was newly married and anxious. When I told her in the car that my husband was taking Mary to her hobby class, she was furious as if it was her own matter. Little did I know that this would ultimately corner my husband. After dropping me off, and spread the story around the neighborhood. Being the head of the neighborhood association, her words spread quickly, and her friends seemed to have confronted my husband about it. The reason my husband was begging for help was this: it seemed to have caused quite a commotion, attracting onlookers around our house. No matter how panicked he was, it was obviously too foolish of him to ask for my help in that situation. I had not heard from Mary since then, and my mind was already made up. Sorry, but can you leave? I'm still not feeling well, and my parents are coming soon. Both of them know about this, right? I want to apologize. Can I stay? My husband spoke in a small, pitiful voice.
What? You wanting to apologize is not my business. I'm busy, so please leave.
Don't say that. By the way, where's the baby? I'll leave after seeing the baby.
Just leave. There are other pregnant women here, so please go.
Even though I replied coldly, he still stood there, so I turned my back and covered myself with a blanket. I'm sorry. Please call Mom for me. I want to send her a photo of the baby. Can I call the nurse? Unbelievably, my husband reached out and shook me. When I couldn't stand it anymore and was about to push him away.
What are you doing? Don't touch my daughter.
My parents walked into the room just in time. My mother rushed over and pushed my husband away.
How dare you shake the body of someone who just gave birth? And after doing such a thing, how could you show your face here? I'm disappointed in you. Get out of here, now.
Even I had never seen my mother so fierce, and overwhelmed by her presence, my husband finally left the room. My father followed him, and I knew he would be thoroughly scolded. During my hospital stay, I refused to see my husband and took the baby to my parents' house after being discharged. I didn't want to risk meeting him, so I told him over the phone that I wanted a divorce. I only communicated about writing the divorce papers, mailing them, and claiming compensation, ignoring anything else he said. By the way, the compensation was for the scratches and bruises I got when he forcibly removed me from the car. He tried to make excuses, but I silenced him by saying I had testimony from and her husband and photos of the injuries from that day. The lawyer said the cost for his malicious actions against a pregnant woman would be significant. While I was busy with the baby, Mary showed up at my parents' house once. The rumors spread by and didn't seem to fade, and the neighbors' gazes were cold. She blamed it all on me for not respecting our family, but my father handled everything. Both of them were scolded by my father, and I thought it would have been better if we had done this from the beginning. But to that my father said, "The head of the household doesn't easily come to the forefront." He was oddly showing off. When I got used to childcare, I invited Anne to my parents' house and introduced her to them. Being of the same age, she quickly became friends with my mother, and we agreed to keep in touch. And then told me about my ex-husband, which she heard from a friend who worked part-time at his company. Her friend, who loves gossip like Anne, seemed to have spread the story about my ex-husband to others at some point. The story spread quickly again, and his reputation plummeted. He had pretended to be a devoted new dad, and the disparity was so great that his bosses and colleagues looked at him with disdain, leading him to resign in disgrace. Becoming unemployed with no qualifications just before turning 30, my ex-husband lived in fear of the neighbors' gazes, relying on Mary's pension and savings. Years later, I almost forgot he existed, but then he called again. "Where are you?" "I'm in front of your parents' house right now, but the nameplate is different, isn't it?" He said this out of the blue, so I responded in kind. "Can't you tell by the nameplate?" "I've moved." "What do you want?" "Moved? You're living it up with the compensation I gave you. Come back right now, let's start over. Mom wants to see you too. What you're saying makes no sense. Why would I go back to you? Still saying that? I don't want to hear anything, so don't call me." I hung up without waiting for a response, and my phone kept ringing for a while. After finally completing the call rejection settings, messages begging for reconciliation arrived. I read them all just in case, but... "Don't you feel sorry that the child doesn't have a father? It's unfilial to not show yourself to mom after taking care of you." He wrote such nonsensical things, so I deleted them all and changed my email address. This whole ordeal was the worst, but thankfully, it allowed me to push for a favorable divorce and penalize the other party. Having such a terrible family member is not good for the child. Thinking so, I enjoyed relaxed parenting while being supported by my parents, who had become grandparents. Got into an accident? I can't go, I'm on a business trip now. A half-laughing voice of my husband is heard over the phone. And mixed with that, the sweet, ingratiating voice of a woman. Wonder what kind of business trip he's really on. Unforgivable. I'll definitely get him back double. My name is Jennifer. I'm 61 after retiring from a company that I worked for many years, and trying to enjoy my second life by joining a book reading circle. I was in drama club during my school days, so I think it's time to show off my skills, despite the long break. Well, because of COVID, I haven't had many opportunities such as visiting schools. Now I can read smoothly picture books, but when I was a bit younger than now, I struggled to read something. Specifically, my husband's mind. That must have been around 17 or 18 years ago. I lived happily with my husband Ronald, who is 2 years older than me, and our daughter Amber, who was in 11th grade. Well, I thought we were living happily. Around that time, I often felt Ronald was being cold to me. It wasn't like he was ignoring me, but conversations didn't expand, and he quickly went back to his room after meals. It seemed like he was avoiding interactions with me and our daughter. Jokingly, "Don't you be cold to me?" I asked. "Just tired." But was that really true? Then he would reply. The unease didn't go away easily. However, "Hey, you've been cold to me lately.
I'm lonely, be kinder.
I wasn't at an age to say such young girls' whims like that. Pretending to be an understanding wife, and I chose to leave Ronald as I thought he must have his reasons. Looking back now, I think the outcome would be the same, whether I had pressed him or not. Meanwhile, Ronald's return time from work started to get later and later. He worked for a white company, where he used to come home on time almost every day. Even though he was a manager now, but he had been coming home later than when he was a general employee. Could this really be happening? It seemed Ronald was dining out, as the meals I prepared were always left on the table, wrapped up until next morning. Busy enough to work until past midnight, yet he found time to eat out. I started to sense contradictions in Ronald's behavior. Then, one day, when I was seeing Ronald off at the entrance.
Will you go home late again today?
Maybe? His indifferent response frustrated me, even with my usual patience. In fact, Ronald's nonchalant replies had become common. Lately, he hardly answered my questions, and I was holding back my dissatisfaction and enduring it. I feared that if we fought, he might never return home one day. If it happened, our daughter would surely be upset. I wanted to avoid the worst-case scenario, but... Hey, haven't you been treating me rough lately? Finally, I blurted out. I don't quite remember, but I think I glared at him without realizing it. Ronald's face was strained. If there's something wrong with me, I'll fix it. Let's talk. Your recent attitude, it doesn't just look like you're tired. Would he get angry? Or just ignore me? My lips quivered as I imagined the worst. But then, all right. Let's talk tonight. It's time to leave now. I have to go. Okay, take care. I didn't feel any warmth in Ronald's words, but I was relieved to know he was willing to talk. It'll be okay, we can still make things right. I thought, but that night, Ronald never came home. He didn't respond to my calls. It seemed like he was running away from our conversation. What a terrible man. Late at night, I finally received a single email. Going on a business trip, back on Tuesday. What is this? It's not a telegram from the old days. The next day, perhaps sensing my irritation, Amber, who was on winter break, asked me, Mom, do you remember our promise to go out together? She said, A promise? Yeah, the one about going out for a drive to practice my driving. You seem to be stressed out, Mom. How about we go to somewhere for a change of pace today?
Oh, right, we had made that promise.
Amber had just gotten her driver's license this summer, but we only had one car. Ronald often used it for work, and with Amber usually at school, she had no chance to practice driving. So, I had promised to accompany her for that practice during the winter break. Despite the break, I had been preoccupied with Ronald, so I completely forgot about it. Even she pitied for my accumulated stress. How pathetic. I felt apologetic and quickly agreed to go out with Amber.
Oh no! It's my first time driving since driving school. I'm nervous.
Stay calm and take it easy. Take a deep breath and try to do some stretches.
Who does that in this situation? Really?
Mom, you're so old-fashioned. Huh? As Amber opened the driver's side door, she suddenly made a puzzled face, crouched down, and picked up something. Hey Mom, this is... What she showed me was a long, glittering fake nail. Both of us were speechless. Neither of us wears fake nails, so whose could it be? The last person to use this car was... Dad, right? Yes. We got into the car, and although Amber started driving, we couldn't hide our disturbance. A fake nail found in the car last used by Ronald. The only thing that made sense was Ronald's infidelity. Since when? With whom? What kind of person? I didn't want to know the details of Ronald's affair, although I couldn't help but be curious about who it was. Amber was probably thinking the same thing, as both of us fell completely silent. And that's why our reaction was delayed.
Amber! Watch out!
I shouted, but it was too late. The car, misjudging a left turn, was crashed head-on into the wall beyond the guardrail.
Mom! Mom, wake up! I'm sorry. Mom!
Amber, are you okay? It seemed I had briefly lost consciousness from the shock. When I opened my eyes, I saw Amber's tear-streaked face.
I'm okay. Mom! I'm so sorry.
Call the police and Dad.
Okay, I got it.
In a panic, Amber pulled out her phone. But she was confused by the first accident. She called Ronald before the police.
Dad? Mom's been in an accident. Huh? An accident? You know, I'm on a business trip, can't do anything. Handle it there, will you? Hey, you're on the phone with me now. Your wife. Come on, just drop it.
Ronald's unusually cheerful voice leaked from the phone, and I understood what he was saying. The ingratiating voice of a woman could also be heard. After being cut off. How could he? I saw Amber, she hung her head down. I'm okay. All I could say to reassure her. After that, I don't remember anything. It seems I lost consciousness again, and when I woke up, I was in the hospital. Then came Tuesday, the day Ronald said he'd be back from his business trip. The intercom rang incessantly. Opening the door, I found an unsettled Ronald. Welcome back. Ronald, greeted at the entrance, looked surprised.
You said you had an accident. What the heck, you look fine. Don't lie.
Furious at being deceived, Ronald spat out those words and tried to enter the house. Amber passed away. Ronald, who had been storming towards me, stopped in his tracks and turned around.
What?
Come with me to this room. I led a bewildered Ronald by the hand to the room.
Wait, explain. Weren't you got into the accident?
I just lost consciousness. It was a mere concussion. But Amber, she was fine after the examination, but last night she suddenly started feeling unwell, and by the time I woke up this morning, she was already.
You're lying, right?
I was waiting for you to come back to see her one last time. As soon as Ronald entered the room and froze when he saw pale-faced our daughter lying down on the bed.
Amber? It can't be true. Amber!
As Ronald tried to cling to our daughter, I stopped him.
Wait! I understand how you feel, but since she passed away at home, the police need to perform an autopsy. Don't touch Amber until the police arrive. I don't care about that. Stop it! Let me go! Please, calm down. It's for Amber's sake.
Ronald, overwhelmed by shock, slumped to the floor powerlessly.
Why Amber?
Ronald began to cry bitterly. Tell me, would you have cried like this if I had met the same fate?
What kind of question is that? Of course, I would. Then why didn't you rush to us when Amber called you about our accident? I was on a business trip. I heard a woman's voice on the phone. It was quite sweet. That was a client.
Hey, you usually do desk work and have no sales or entertainment duties. What kind of business trip were you on with a client? What kind of work?
It's enough. Stop nagging. We should be focusing on Amber now.
Is this the client in this photo? I showed a photo on my phone, and Ronald was at a loss for words. On the screen, there was a beautiful young woman with striking features and suited black hair.
When did you find?
That reaction tells me I'm right.
No. I don't know any woman like that.
Then what about this? I showed Ronald the fake nail I found in the car, catching him off guard. At that moment, Ronald lost words.
This belongs to her, right? You can't say you don't know her now, can you? Where did you find that?
In the car. Amber found it. Both of us were so shocked we got distracted, and then the accident happened, all because of you.
That's your fault for not paying attention. Don't act all high and mighty.
The moment Ronald retorted. No woman could stay calm after discovering her husband's affair, Don't be so shameless, old man.
What?
Surprised by the voice of his daughter, who was supposed to be eternally asleep, Ronald turned around in shock. But there she was, lying down motionless just as before.
What was that just now?
Ronald's face turned pale at this bizarre situation. With a father's misdeeds so grievous, maybe she can't ascend to heaven.
A ghost? No, a zombie.
No matter the form, she's still our daughter.
Wait. This is different.
What if she's come back to life? Aren't you happy?
That's impossible. It's scary. What if something that isn't Amber has come into this house?
Ronald, genuinely terrified, clung to me. He always was bad with horror. Then, our daughter slowly sat up and hugged Ronald from behind. Hee, Dad. She said with a smile, hugging him. Ronald, reacting to his daughter's mischief,
Eek!
let out a high-pitched and fled to a corner of the room.
Ha ha ha. You totally fell for it. Got scared for real. I've been alive the whole time.
Ronald looked at us in astonishment during Amber had burst out laughing. What do you mean?
This is what you get for cheating, old man. We set up this whole act.
Normally, I would scold Amber for her words, but she probably doesn't even want to call him Dad anymore. This time, I thought. Oh, and she calls Ronald as an old man, so I just forgive this time. Well, she said including man, so it's okay. I decided to let it go. I would like to call him something much worse. Amber thoroughly explained to the utterly bewildered Ronald the entire sequence of events.
So, both Mom and I just got examined and we're fine. Alive really well.
I looked up people associated with your company on social media, old man, and found someone with the same fake nails.
I thought, maybe she was, and when I checked her posts, there was a photo with a man resembling you.
Plus, on the same day you didn't come home, she blatantly posted about a date with her boyfriend. And on the day of the accident, she wrote about being on a trip with her boyfriend. It's no coincidence.
So, Mom suggested me pretend to be dead to scare you, thinking you'd slip up under pressure. Scared you, didn't we?
About me and Amber's sly smile, Ronald.
I was really worried. You two are the worst.
Agitated, exclaimed. Well, maybe going as far as doing death makeup to look pale and lying down about an autopsy was a bit much, but I don't want to hear it from someone who cheated. Amber nodded vigorously at my words. If you were really concerned, you would have rushed over the moment we called. Your sudden act of a worried father doesn't resonate at all.
You must have enjoyed your affair trip, right? Didn't want to leave the young woman? A man who prioritizes his desires over his family, a rotten to the core guy. I don't care about you anymore.
Ronald was frozen by our daughter's strong logic and biting sarcasm.
I admit it, I did wrong by cheating, but being blamed by Amber is tough. She's my only daughter. What? So you want us to forgive you, Dad?
Yes.
How pathetic he is.
What do you think, Mom? Amber looked at me intently.
Well, first, I want to know how you met this woman and hear all the details. Hey! Mom wants to know, so spill it immediately, old man.
Fueled by anger, Amber, now more of a bandit than a high school girl, grabbed Ronald by the collar, making him tremble. Additionally, Amber reacted by saying, I accidentally touched him. She rejected the hand that had touched Ronald as if it was contaminated. Needless to say, Ronald was so shocked that he teared up. Deciding to come clean, Ronald began to recount how he met this woman. Their meeting was at a company event. The younger woman admired Ronald's work and approached him proactively. She claimed to want only to talk about work as a junior colleague. But Ronald, flattered, decided to pursue her. The woman, charmed by the attention from someone she admired, accepted Ronald's advances, but she was single. Moreover, she was hoping to marry Ronald, leading to recent tensions since Ronald hadn't intended to destroy his family for a fling. He explained that not speaking to me was due to his anxiety about their relationship being discovered, fearing that I might notice his irritability. The trip, which I thought was for an affair, was actually to appease her mood, as he candidly admitted. As for the fake nail, it was likely deliberately left by the woman, who was growing impatient for marriage, hoping that its discovery would lead to our divorce. If you choose me and over her, I might consider not divorcing you. Of course. With Amber here. I choose you, no question. Then call her here right now. I need to hear her say it's over, face to face, to believe you. I understood. 2 hours later, Ronald's mistress, Sarah, arrived at our house in response to his call. I said, "You must be Sarah, right?" Then Sarah, openly hostile, declared, "Whatever you do, I won't break up with him." Sarah responded with open hostility. "No. I want to break up. I want to start again with my family." At Ronald's words, Sarah's face turned pale.
You're kidding, right?
She repeatedly asked Ronald in disbelief. Sorry. I like you, Sarah, but not enough to pay alimony to my wife and live with you. Wait, did he say outrageous statements?
It's not about me or Amber, but just about not wanting to pay alimony?
Both Amber and I were appalled.
That's terrible. I was serious about you.
Sarah was pounding on Ronald's chest. Indeed, Ronald had been terrible, and her feelings were understandable.
Hit him harder, enough to affect his ribs.
I found myself secretly cheering for her at that moment. Ronald, looking troubled, simply let it happen without resistance. That's how it is, Sarah. Ronald won't be yours, and he will pay alimony. Also, write a pledge saying you won't be with Ronald anymore.
Don't be ridiculous. I absolutely refuse.
Please, Sarah. Initially resistant to my demand, Sarah seemed to understand the futility after Ronald's plea. Fine. She weakly responded and began writing the pledge as I had instructed. Then, right after making Ronald write a pledge with the same contents.
Ah, good. So we do not get divorced, right?
Ronald, still trembling, quickly finished writing his pledge next to Sarah, who was still writing hers, and then blurted out a tactless remark. Even the usually composed Sarah's face turned pale.
You're despicable.
And muttered that. It must have been a moment of realization for Sarah, where 100 years of love could fade in an instant. A good riddance, indeed. No divorce is a no-go.
What do you mean?
I mean, no divorce is not happening. We're getting divorced.
What? You said you'd consider not divorcing. Yes, I considered it, and I decided we should divorce. What? That's not fair. After making me write this pledge.
Well, I never really considered not divorcing him, but that's a secret. Don't worry, once we're divorced, that pledge becomes meaningless. So, what will you do? Restart with Sarah?
Why would I do that? Wait, should I?
Sarah, should we try again? Ronald gazed at Sarah with an unmistakable ulterior motive in his eyes. However, the look that Sarah returned was incredibly cold and detached, a stark contrast to Ronald's intentions.
Are you joking? You easily agreed to write that pledge to break up, showing how little you cared. And now you want to turn things around because you don't want to be alone? Too late. No, that's not what I meant.
Watching their exchange, Amber and I couldn't help but smirk. Honestly, I'd be upset if Ronald just quickly moved on with his affair partner after our divorce. Amber felt the same. I wanted Ronald to experience the same despair of being abandoned that my daughter and I felt when he betrayed us. That's why my daughter and I came up with this covenant strategy. Ronald is a man of high pride. And it was easy for my daughter and me to foresee that he would refuse a divorce. So, we decided to use the threat of divorce as leverage, gaining control over the situation and guiding Ronald's actions to our advantage. Sarah's feelings for Ronald would surely plummet after seeing him agree so easily to part ways. I never expected Ronald to reveal such despicable traits, but well done, Ronald. Perfectly played the fool. Ugh. Thanks for nothing. I'll pay whatever it takes to get rid of you. I was foolish to fall for a man like you.
Wait, Sarah. I was wrong. Let's start over.
But Sarah pushed away the desperate Ronald clinging to her. Oh, so I'm no longer of interest to you?
No, that's not what I meant. You won't reconsider the divorce?
No.
You only cared about avoiding alimony, right? I thought your pride wouldn't allow you to be dumped, but I guess money comes first. That's a miscalculation on my part. I do love you.
So what am I to you, really? Sarah glared sharply at Ronald.
Oh, that's scary.
Finally, Ronald was left speechless.
Ha ha ha. It's pathetic, old man. Rejected by both women in the end. Well, who would want such a man?
Amber burst into laughter. Give me a break. Leaving Ronald to hold his head in his hands, saying, Sorry, but even if Mom decided to get back with you, I wouldn't allow it. I don't want to acknowledge you as a father. It's creepy. Perhaps shocked most by his daughter's words, Ronald broke down. Please forgive me. I'm sorry. And then, he burst into heavy tears. Seeing a grown man cry over his own mistakes was, to say the least, off-putting for Sarah, Amber, and myself. There was no way we could ever have feelings for such a big baby. Afterward, as declared, we demanded alimony from both Sarah and Ronald and proceeded with a thorough division of property in the divorce. From Sarah. Thanks to you, I've been able to get out of a bad relationship. I'm sorry for the trouble, and thank you. Later came to me with a box of sweets in hand and said, It was a surprising turn of events to be thanked by the mistress, but in a way, it was a relief that the divorce didn't leave a completely bitter taste. As for Ronald, let me see Amber. He contacted me several times, asking to see our daughter, but ugh, so annoying. Just block him. So, following Amber's wishes, I blocked him and continued to ignore him. Now, Amber is married and, incredibly, the mother of triplets.
I can't handle 3 kids on my first try.
Although she was initially overwhelmed, she had become a splendid, resilient mother. Her husband is a genuinely good man, helping with childcare and household chores. I doubt he would ever cheat like Ronald did. As for me, although I joined a book reading circle, COVID limited my opportunities to showcase my readings. However, I found joy in reading to my grandchildren. At first, my 3 grandchildren showed no interest in picture books, making me lose confidence. But now, just by me picking up a picture book.
What story are you reading today?
Now, they gather around excitedly whenever. I hope they grow up to be kind and fond of reading. After experiencing the biggest turmoil of my life, I'm now thoroughly enjoying a peaceful and fulfilling second chapter.